He was a lead man in a gun group. He was out on patrol and basically got shot. They were under a lot of heavy fire and all that kind of thing. My name is Bill Whiting. I'm here to talk about my brother Richard Whiting, who was one of the 27 heroes that passed away in Vietnam on June 20th, 1966. This is, I think, 9 days after his 19th birthday, and that's what we're talking about. Probably about 1950, my parents, both of them were veterans from World War II, moved here to Pico, Rivera. I was at that time 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old, and they bought a home here on next to the river, and we had my brother Richard born 16 months after me. So there's just the two of us, and then they had my sister Sue was born, and they at that time bought another house down on Limeran down by South Ranchito School. They had a 3-bedroom house then with 1 bathroom, I might add. Growing up in Pico Rivera was unique. We lived on a dead-end street at that time. Limeran was a dead-end street. We were able to walk down to South Ranchito, where both Richard and I went to school. And we spent virtually every day down there at the school activities. They had great summer programs there, a lot of sports and things like that. As I think I mentioned, everybody on the street knew everybody. I mean, if you did something down the street, by the time you got home, your mother or father knew about it. It was an amazing community at that time. We had school board members on the street. I don't think El Rancho had been built at that time. We both ended up going to Mary Miller and then on to El Rancho. We were very sports orientated. My father was a Cub master of the Cub Scouts here in the town. Baseball coach. I think most of the kids that graduated in the 60s knew him as coach because he coached all their baseball games and things like that. One of the founders of the Pico baseball program that was out here. I remember the Rotary Club sponsored his team. It was called the Scooters, and there was many, many friends that played on that team, and they won a championship and did all great things there. Richard and I were very, very close, very competitive. Growing up, it was the two of us and a sister, and then all the other kids start being born. As the oldest of 10 children in our family, we have quite a history predating us in Pico Rivera. I know that the family left later on. At El Rancho, we both played sports there. Neither one of us, I think, were really great students. We had a lot of fun, and I know he might have had a little more fun than I did. He had many, many friends. He was 2 years behind me in school. I graduated in '63. He graduated in '65. And it was a great time to grow up in America. That was prior to Vietnam at that point in time. I went into the Army in 1963. I went to basic training in Fort Ord, and I was in Fort Ord for 3 days when JFK got killed. It was an amazing time. Obviously, everything in the country shut down. I went to AIT also in Fort Ord, and I went on to Fort Benning, went to jump school there, and then I went to Fort Bragg and was stationed with the 7th Special Forces there, and then went to Germany in December of '64, and was stationed there with the 10th Special Forces in Germany. And Richard and I would talk from time to time growing up. He wrote letters after he got into the military. I think there's always been a little moniker of guilt on my part because he wanted to go to jump school, he wanted to do those things. He went in the 101st Airborne Division and obviously got killed in Vietnam very, very shortly after he got there. I know that he was in 2 major battles when he was there. I was in Special Forces at the time in Germany, and the 5th Special Forces was in Vietnam. And by telex and things like that, we could follow the movements of the various organizations that were there. And we especially monitored the 5th because they were all people that we either went to training with or knew, and a lot of us were going to go serve over there. And so in June, they got into a huge battle there, and I knew the 101st was there, and I knew the 137th was there, and of course the Special Forces group was working with the indigenous forces there, and they were in trouble, and I think the 101st went in there to try to solve some of the issues. I think it was one of the more violent campaigns that were there. If I remember correctly, I think about a third of the kids that were there in the company passed away in the 6 or 8 day period of time that thing was going on. He was a lead man in a gun group. He was out on patrol and basically got shot. They were under a lot of heavy fire and all that kind of thing. I was in my squad room at the time. I got a phone call before he could tell me, the captain, his name was Robert E. Keen, I'll never forget the man, great guy. Before he could tell me my brother passed away, I said, he's gone, isn't he? And that was true. And I went back to my room, and I don't think I talked to my parents on the phone, because I think the Red Cross came in, facilitated me to come back to the States. I think I had to take a flight from Munich into Frankfurt, and Frankfurt, I think, to Philadelphia, and then Philadelphia on to LA, and I was picked up by my father at LAX. And I had a Green Beret on, I was in full uniform. I had sergeant stripes on, and I had been in a horrendous accident in Germany. I had a cast on my arm and was limping badly on my right leg, and I came out at the United counter there on the street where my father was going to pick me up, and there was a bunch of Marines down at the end of the street, and they looked at me and said, "What army are you in?" And I facetiously said, "Russian." And they all scattered and went away. That was how I got here. And then I got home, and my, obviously everything was in uproar. They had moved from Pico, Rivera to Diamond Bar, I think, in 1965. There was now, I think, six, seven children at that time. I had been gone for 2.5 years. And so I was recognizing family and friends and things like that. My mother and father, for that part, were not in condition, I don't think, to make a lot of quick decisions, and we went to view the body, and my mother desperately wanted to have an open casket. The funeral was going to be at St. Hilary's, where we all grew up and went to church at, and it was highly attended, and she wanted everybody to pay respects to him. And I made the decision not to have an open casket because it just didn't look like him. We all knew that it was him, but it wasn't something that you'd want to put out to everybody. The time was, obviously we had a very large family, extended family, aunts, uncles, and community. The church was absolutely packed. The service, if I remember correctly, it was still Father Bill at that time, and Father Hudson, I believe, they were the priest. And I'm going back in ancient history, but we grew up at in that parish. I boxed there, and Dick and I were altar boys there, and the community was amazing, as it still is, with everything that they do to celebrate veterans and the fallen in this community. I've been back one time to the ceremony that we experienced today, and that was 5 years ago, and my father was 95, going to shortly be 96, and it was the last time he attended. He never missed one of these things. And I was so pleased that Sandy and I were able to attend that. It was much like it was done today. It's an absolutely beautiful ceremony. The city pulls out everything to do it. Obviously, the extension today of having the wall, the moving wall there, was amazing. Our family has always been hurt, I think, by the thought process of all these folks that have passed away, all 58,000 plus, and having a sibling that had done that has been tough, I think, on our family. The years that makes it easier and maybe somewhat kinder. I know on the anniversary of his 50th death, we all, our family, all went back to Washington, D.C. and went to the actual wall and had a dinner, and we had a great time. I think there was, somebody said 43 of us whitings there, which is a remarkable number in any time. And it's just a celebration of not only his life, but our thoughts and prayers that extend out to everybody that was involved in that activity. The time doesn't make it any easier. I've had a picture of him on my desk at home for 30, 40 years. Recently got put into the El Rancho Hall of Fame, and they were kind enough to send me that, and that sits on my desk as well. The Vietnam War was one of mixed emotions for, I think, the country as well as the community, and it's hard to put into words what we could have done differently, what we would have changed. I think everybody who served would have gone back. I think those who didn't serve probably would have wanted to go. I think everybody that I knew in the service, that was their mission, is to train and go do those things, and you went and did it. Fortunately, I had orders to go to Vietnam when my brother was killed. Those orders were rescinded, so I still had about a year left in the military, and I was not able to go. And I certainly would have, but they pulled the orders on me, so that was great. I finished out my tour in '67, came back to California, attended Cal State Fullerton, graduated from there, got married and have 2 boys, and life has been very, very good for me and my family, and I think our whole family. One of the great things our parents did was raise us to be independent. And I think every one of Richard's siblings are exactly that, independent. It's a wonderful, wonderful family. Anytime we get together, it's like we haven't been apart. It's great. Unfortunately, you know, I left home at 17. My brother got killed at 19. The next youngest one, Sue, would have probably been about 16 at the time. And the rest of them, you know, your memories are not of him growing up and things like that. Your memories are mostly of the activities of his death and those kind of things, and the stories that you've all heard. The jumping off the roof one that Chuck Salter talked about, I remember in our backyard on Limeran, we would get on a roof and jump off that thing all the time. You know, we grew up in a house that had 3 bedrooms, and we had, I think at one time, 4 boys in one and 3 girls in the other, or something like that. And one bathroom, I might add. We were very orderly. Very strict. And then when I left, they moved out to Diamond Bar and got 2 bathrooms. So
still didn't go in the other bathroom. It was an unwritten rule.
Yeah, but we were very active in the neighborhood. I mean, we were outside the whole time. I mean, unlike today in this day and age where you had to watch your kids and things like that, never ever in this community did anybody ever do that. And you go back, and I grew up here in the 50s and 60s, mainly the 50s, but you know, I went into high school in '59 and got out in '63. It was a different world, and Pico Rivera was a much smaller place at that time. And it's remarkable, today they still only have the 1 high school, and you can go back through all the annuals and history of the school. And I played football at the school. I played baseball at St. Paul High School. I went there for 1 year. The community was very, very tight. It was a fabulous place to grow up, and I know going back over the years to some of our school reunions, I think the last one we had was 40. I don't think they had one at 50 or something, but all the guys, all the girls are still close. There's a Facebook site that the class of '63 still has, and we're still in contact today. At the event, I saw Paul Bartolo, I went to school with for years and years and years. It's unique, and we're still in contact. You know, we talk to each other probably 3 or 4 or 5 times a year.
Do you remember any of the other 20?
Well, I knew of some of them, yes, absolutely. Some by name mostly. Most of them were younger. Class of '63, you know, I think the first one was '62. The class of '63, I don't recall their names. I did know a little bit about John Stalter, because he was a friend of my brother's. I knew a little bit about Sam Favia. He was a couple years younger than me, but I know he's involved in the sports. And while I was maybe playing junior varsity and varsity sports, they were playing B and C sports. And you know, the school was small enough that you all got to know. And I remember Favia for sure, because he was a really good athlete. And we had a lot of good athletes in El Rancho at that time. it was just a marvelous time to grow up, and the memories are great of that community. And I think it's shared when you go back and talk to folks who, to this day, you know, El Rancho is very proud of their community, the school. I know, I think it was my father one time years ago called me up and said El Rancho was on the national news today for their academics. Well, having not been a great academic student at El Rancho, I was kind of surprised at that. But no, it was a great school, and as any school, you can get out of it whatever you really want. And at that time, growing up, a lot of us, when we were interested in sports and other things, working, trying to earn a living, that kind of thing. And whereas I think it's more dedicated potentially now towards academic, towards academics, and not so much sports and social life.
I did have a question.
Yep.
How difficult was it for you not to be able to go back to Vietnam and put in the fight?
Well,
to want to try and get some revenge?
Well, this is something, that's a good question, because when I was stationed at Fort Bragg, this is in 1964, Vietnam was nothing more than, we had Special Forces people there on the ground, things like that, so we were aware of it at Fort Bragg. And the next barracks over, there's a guy named Barry Sadler who did that song, the Green Beret song. And we all, you know, it was small, the JFK War Center there. We did all kinds of experimental things there. We'd pick up guys with C-130s out of the ground and things like that. We did parachute jumps from 500 feet to see them, make sure the parachute's open and things like that. I was a jump master. I ran jump schools in Europe. You know, I probably made, I don't know, 75, 80 jumps or something like that. And it was all secondhand from that point. So we understood everything that was going on in Vietnam. And I can assure you that everybody I knew in Battles, Germany, would have gone there in a heartbeat, because that's what we were trained to do. In essence, the role of Special Forces was to integrate into indigenous forces. The big thing in Vietnam was the Mountain Yard community, who didn't want either the North or the South involved at all. The Special Forces went in there and made them very effective fighting force. The South Vietnamese, the ARVN Army, was not all that effective. They had a lot of leadership problems, a lot of political problems, and we were more in the vein of trying to ascertain what it would take to do teamwork and things like that. In my time in Europe, I was in every country in Western Europe, with the exception of Portugal, doing training back and forth with, I did Iran, Iraq, Turkey, France, Belgium, England. I spent time in France for like 3 months and stuff like that. What we did is work with foreign armies to try to input our activities to them so they'd be more effective fighting forces.
About your parents, their names. You said that they served in any type of...
They were both in the Navy. My mother was a wave, and she worked in a post office. My father was tried to be a submariner, and then he ended up on a minesweeper, and off of South America, and ended up in Philadelphia. They both met in Philadelphia. I think he was mailing letters home every day so he could see my mother, I think, because she was working in the post office. But that's how they met, and they moved to Bakersfield, and I was born in Bakersfield. My brother, everybody else was born in LA or Montebello or someplace like that. But that's how they met. My grandfather was the head of communications in the state of California one time in Bakersfield, Kern County, and started the Kern County Communications Center up there. It's named after him up there in Kern County, Bakersfield. And that's how they were involved in World War II. And they're both buried in Fort Rosecrans in San Diego, where my brother's also interned with them. And so I know many of us have gone down to Fort Rosecrans in San Diego many, many times. It's a beautiful, beautiful site. One to withhold. I know when my father passed away, all of us were down there at Fort Rosecrans and had the ceremony, and he was buried there with his wife and his son. It's a great, great story.
I think the day it is seared into my memory. All of us older kids had gone to the beach that day. My mom was left with the two younger ones. And my dad worked for the railroad. He was a mechanic, and he had his own big orange truck. When we came around the corner after returning from the beach, his orange truck was there, and that was about 3 o'clock. But he never arrived until after 4. So it was almost instant that we knew something was amiss. We came in through the back door because we didn't want to get sand in the house. My mom was very particular. My dad was there at the door and in tears. And he just grabbed us all. We just all went to him. And he didn't have to say anything. We knew what had happened. At least I did. The younger ones probably not. But the vision that I have is my mom answering that door with a toddler and a baby in her arms, a 9-month-old baby. I think that's how old our youngest brother is. And for me, watching them grieve, as a child, they taught us how to grieve. And it taught me for the rest of my life how to do that. And they made it a priority to celebrate and remember Richard. We always, I think it was every Memorial Day, we would go down to Fort Rosecrans and be at the gravesite and spend time there. It was good to the neighbors. They all chipped in. I'll never forget one of our neighbors from Pico, Rivera. She came over and took all of us kids out for ice cream cones so that my mom could have time alone. And this was early on, right after it had happened. But all of the former neighbors really chipped in, whether it was for babysitting, making sure we were all occupied when the funeral went on. But that was my memory. And as far as letters and things, we always, when one would come in, we'd all read them. They would share them. My parents would share them with us. He was always upbeat in his letters, almost to the point where he was talk about what he was doing. I'm sure it was filtered, but I'm talking about being home. He'll be coming home. And maybe we could get these pictures, but there was a picture of him when he first arrived in Vietnam, and he had that grin on his face, the look that I remember as a girl. And there was another picture of him after he'd been there maybe a month or so, and he was gaunt, and he had a haunted look in his eye. When I see that, it's good to see it. It's hard to look at. And so I think those are probably the memories that I have. And then the thing that has stuck with me through the years is that we've got to keep the memory alive. And that's really important. And the stories to tell about all of this, so that we don't forget. And it's therapeutic also to remember. It's good to tell our stories. I had another experience just when he was in Vietnam, because I think it relates to what an 11-year-old is thinking. But at the time, every day at 6 o'clock, or at 6 o'clock news, the evening news, we always had it on in our house. But they would show Vietnam every single day. And I was old enough to understand what was going on, that this was not good. This was scary. And my brothers were there. And I remember at dinner table one night, I just broke down and I cried. And then my brothers and sisters, all the younger ones, all made fun of me. Oh, I think I understood that. And I felt like he wasn't going to come back. So I ran into my room. My dad came to comfort me and, patched everything up, and, it was all good to go. And then it happened, and I think that's, I don't forget that. I'll never forget that. So that's the kind of point of view from an 11-year-old, where you understand, you're old enough to understand, but really don't have the skills to cope and to understand how to make other people feel better or how to get yourself going. And it's something that's affected our family, as Bill had said. It's difficult. I mean, it was a difficult time. And seeing, and my mom, I think she had a very difficult time, and she was not well physically sometimes as a result of it. Just the way, what it took out of you, to lose a son.
He was my big brother. He was 19 years old when he was killed in Vietnam. I was 7 at the time. And as a 7-year-old, you only have a few memories of your brother at that time. But I remember him, he was a great artist. He made a Beatles sweatshirt. And I think I wore it, but I don't think it was his sweatshirt. I just remember the Beatles sweatshirt that he drew. All 4 Beatles on it. Right now it'd be worth thousands of dollars probably, so it'd be pretty cool to have. But and then and then we went on a trip up to up north, and Bill had to watch one sibling and Dick had to watch another one. I think Bill watched me and somebody else watched Dick, but I wanted Dick to watch me, and I didn't get to. Bill had to watch me, pecking order or something. But anyway, so that was when we went to the. But like Linda said, when we got home from the beach that day, we went to the beach. We came home. It was a 57 Dodge or something that we were driving. We had a flat tire on the way home, and then so we got home. I don't remember the hug from the dad, but I just remember sitting in the bathtub, as you would from the coming home from the beach, and just sitting there and crying, thinking, wow, I'll never get to see my brother again. But we weren't involved in the younger kids weren't involved in the funeral as a 7-year-old, but one of the neighbor kids took me in an MG, and we went on a tour of Southern California. He came, picked me up, and we drove all over Pasadena. He showed me the bridge out there and stuff, and he brought me home, but that was just the type of community it was back then. But the main thing, like I said, I don't have a lot of memories as a 7-year-old of my brother, but what I remember is growing up in life. Every time I had a tough situation to think about, or I ran cross country at a high school, and before every race, I would speak to my brother. Before every race, I'd speak to him, and I'd tell him to give me. So here I was, a high schooler, running cross country, and I would, before each race, I'd talk to him, say, give me the strength to do the best I can today. And every race, I must have ran, 20 races a season. So he was there for me at every race. And I graduated from high school, and I was the similar type of student as my brothers. I wasn't a real bright student, but what I really wanted to do was join the military. But I made the choice not to join the military because of the hurt and everything that my parents had already endured. So probably the best thing for me would have been to join the military, spend 3 or 4 years sorting out what Joe Whiting should have done. But I didn't join, and I ended up having a great life. And then and then again, my brother being for me again. I have 2 sons, and when my 3rd son was born, he was stillborn. And one of the salvations is that I knew that Dick would be in heaven to watch over him. I told that to my dad. And I said, at least Dick's up there to help him, you know? And then the same thing, when my mom passed away, I was in the room where she was staying, the bedroom at home, and there was a picture of Dick right on the dresser. And I was telling Dick, I said, Dick, my mom was sick with cancer. And I said, Dick, you need to come get Mom. She's ready. I said, she's ready, you need to come get her. And I said, she's ready. I said, please come and get her. And, you know, the next day she passed away. But I knew I had the comfort of knowing that my brother was there, and he had already had the advanced scouting on heaven, and he knew what he was, you know, he knew he could take care of him. So our family has been extremely fortunate. The fact that we had a brother that passed away at my age of 7, but he was only 19. But we were so fortunate the rest of the kids, the other 9 kids, have been really, really good people, really good citizens of the United States, and we've all had great lives, and we all have big families, and we all have endured. And I always looked at Richard as being our guardian angel, and the fact that he was there to look over us, and that he sacrificed himself so the rest of the 9 kids could have a great life, you know. And that's really how I think it all was a master plan to make it all work right.
I'm Carol Whiting, and I'm here to speak about my brother Richard, who was killed in Vietnam. And I think this weekend what was so nice is his classmates coming up to us and telling us stories. And I remember them telling us what a prankster he was and a jokester he was. And I only have a couple memories. I was only 9 when he was killed in Vietnam. And one memory, it's not really a memory, my mother told me my first word was Dickie. And that's what we called him at home. So that was my first word. The other 2 memories are alluding to our trip to Hearst Castle. He was in charge of me. Dick was in charge of me. And I remember being in the inside pool, and he grabbed me, he's gonna throw me in. And I was so scared. He was never gonna do it, and he didn't do that. And so that's my real memory of him. And the next memory was being on Limerant Avenue. Little girl, you wore your sunsuit with the elastic and the ties on the top, and he got a caterpillar and put it down my back. And I was freaking out, and he was laughing. Probably other family members were there laughing at me, and I was so mad. But that's the 2 real memories I have of him, because I was only 9. But also, like Linda said, we went to the cemetery every Memorial Day. And the trip to Washington, D.C. with all of us, it's instilled in us, and his memory will never go away. We had our children, my grandson was there, other siblings, grandchildren were there. We talk about him all the time when we're together, so his memory will go on forever. And I met a friend for breakfast yesterday morning. I told her what we were doing, and she says, oh, I remember in 9th grade in a history class, people were talking about Vietnam, and you just got up and ran out. And the teacher's like, where's she going? And my girlfriend said, her brother was killed in Vietnam. So she's leaving, and I'm going after her. And it was, those are what I remember. But I think the main thing is just our family. I don't think we're closer because of it, but we are a very close family. We don't get in each other's business, but if anyone ever needed anything, someone is there, everyone is there to help. And that's part of my parents, what they instilled in us, and I think it's part of knowing we don't have Richard to be with us, and we're going to be there, whatever anyone needs.
The 9th of 10th kids in the Whiting family. And your question was, what was it like? What was the question again? What was the effect?
Being the youngest one.
Being the youngest. I was 2 years old when he died. So I didn't know him. He was there probably when I was growing, when I was very tiny, but I don't remember him. But I do remember my parents. Every night on TV, I think Linda said it, that we watched the news. I grew up with Vietnam on the TV. I remember it as a young kid. I remember the fall of Saigon. And I remember my dad, he had a look that I could never explain until I was older. And it was the sadness. And my mom, same way. So I grew up with those memories, with them, the pain that I didn't understand as a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid. But later on, realizing, yeah, that was true pain. But in our house, we had a den in Diamond Bar, not in Pico. We had 2 portraits. One of Bill on one side in his green beret, and Richard on the other side. And they lined that room. They were the pieces in that room. And on Richard's portrait, he was shot in the neck. And whoever made that portrait had red coming from the right side. I believe it was the right side. I looked at those things every day. Every day. I mentioned before, those were my heroes growing up, both those pictures. And I became a cop. And living to those memories of those 2 portraits was probably my driving factor in how I grew up. With the rest of my siblings, but those 2 portraits on the wall were my reminders on what I wanted in life. And I'll never forget, I believe it was 1976. There was a show. It was called Friendly Fire. Carol Burnett was the star of this show. And they've mentioned it, and my siblings have mentioned it, when those two Army personnel walk up to the door and they open the door, Carol Burnett opens the door, and she knows exactly what's going on, and they tell her. And during that scene, and I was watching my dad, my younger brother, and my mom. My mom left the room. And my dad just looked at both of us and just kind of pointed at us. And said, it is in his way of saying, do not say a word. She's going to take care of herself, or something. I understood that she needed to leave the room, because later on in life, much later, what Linda told about those 2 people coming to our house, and the 2 toddlers and the baby, I was the toddler. And I realized I was probably right next to my mom when she got that word. And again, I didn't know anything about what was going on. I was too young. But that day when we saw that movie in '76, it hit me very hard, and I've never forgotten that. Joe talked about going in the military. I was a high school basketball player. I was pretty good. My older brother, Charlie, played college basketball. And when I was a junior, I got a package from West Point. I remember filling it out at school. I put it in my locker. And at 17 years old, I could not return that. Never told my parents. I told my brother Charlie about 6 weeks ago of this story, and he never heard that story either. I could not return. I don't know if I ever could have been admitted to West Point, but I didn't try because of what I remember my parents going through. And I remember one day, I think it was after my junior year, I cleaned my locker out and I disposed of it because I couldn't do it at 17 years old. But I tell this story that when I was 23 years old, I applied for the Riverside Sheriff's Department and became a deputy sheriff. And it's at 17, I couldn't put my parents through that, but at 23, I knew I had a life to lead. And I knew at that time what I wanted to do. And not that I didn't take their feelings into consideration, but I knew what I had to do, and they were okay with it. And I never talked to them about it, but those are things how it did affect me. And I got that question from an 8th grade student of mine about in the early March. And I told him, because he said, at 2 years old, how does that affect you? How does his death affect you? And I said, every day that I live, it affects me. To this day. And it has. Because I had seen my parents live the aftermath until I was old enough to understand. And so I go back to going to San Diego. We still go down there. We see my parents. We see Richard. And it's a great trip down there. So what his question was, how does it affect me? It did. Every day of my life. That I have some correlation to his death that I remember.
If I can follow up, at what age did you fully grasp what had happened?
Well, I would have to say, I know the fall of Saigon was in 73 or 4. I mean, I remember when President Nixon pulled out of Vietnam, or started the thing, and I think it was 1973. And I was probably 9 years old at that time. And like I said, those portraits on the wall always weighed heavily on me. And when that, putting it all together, and my mom and dad did a very good job. They had these books that were in these cabinets that we were never allowed to touch. His Purple Heart, his Silver Star was next to it, but as I got older, I could look into that cabinet. And, but to answer your question, age 9, I think that would be a fair assessment of 8 or 9, that I knew the impact. I didn't know what it had impacted my parents because I was probably too young, but I always knew that we had a brother that died in Vietnam. It meant probably little to me growing up till that age. But when we got out of Vietnam, and as a country, I think that's probably when I had that realization. And there's always, and I have that picture somewhere at home. I was probably about 3 years old. Excuse me, about 3 years old. And there's a picture of me in his army boots with his military hat on. It's more of a, I don't know what to call it. It's one of the longest hats. And I'm sitting there saluting. And that picture gets surfaced once in a while. I always, I guess when I was young, when I saw it, I thought it was a funny picture, but it takes a different interpretation now.